Neil, good morning. Thanks for the conversation. How you doing?
I'm doing all right. Good morning to you as well.
You run the website fieldofschemes.com. That was also the name of your publication. So I think we should establish this before anything else. You've got a pretty clear-cut opinion on public subsidies going to professional sports stadiums.
Yeah, so this started over 25 years ago when my co-author Joanna Kig and I first started researching articles that then turned into our book Field of Schemes. And, we went into it certainly with a critical eye about, this seems like an awful lot of money being spent, but not much other than that and just being sports fans. And very quickly discovered that it wasn't just sort of a minor controversy about, where people disagree, but something where the overwhelming weight of evidence is that the, billions of dollars is being put in public money into sports stadiums and arenas gets back nothing like that in any kind of return, right? It doesn't benefit the cities. It doesn't benefit fans. It doesn't benefit, really anyone other than the sports team owners who obviously are getting even richer off of this.
I think your mantra is since '98, we've been casting a critical eye on the roughly $2 billion a year in public subsidies that go toward building new pro sports facilities. So that's very obvious, very apparent. Let me just add this. Is it, in your opinion, that any public money, any time, any place, any situation ever is a bad idea? Or are there some cases that might make sense?
Sure, there's a price point, right?
Okay.
Where if you're, really the team is really going to move or it's really in dire straits. And by putting in a little bit of money, you can help get something done that would actually benefit everyone.
Okay.
That's fine. The problem is that price point is usually like 10% or less than what's being spent, right? We're not talking about providing some low income loans or, some discounted land or, sort of some sort of minor help to get private projects, sort of over the hump.
Got
We're
it.
talking about projects that are really just happening, not because teams necessarily need new stadiums, but because team owners want subsidies. And if you go to the local state legislature and say, I would like $500 million, they'll usually say, yeah, no, really not right now. Whereas if you say, I would like $500 million for a new stadium, then suddenly it's a different story.
Has this always been your background, or is this something you got into over the years?
Really, it was something that Joanna and I stumbled into in the '90s
Mm,
when she's from Cleveland, I'm from New York, and the Yankees were looking for a new stadium at the same time that New York City was, having budget cuts and closing libraries,
right.
and Cleveland was talking about building a new stadium to bring the new Browns back after the Browns left for Baltimore at a time when their schools were in receivership. And we thought, wow, this is a real sort of contrast here. Let's take a look at these two cities. It'll be a cute little 1,000-word article comparing Cleveland and New York, and really quickly discovered that this was an enormous issue. And I honestly did not expect that almost 30 years later I
Yeah.
would still be following this, but nothing really seems to have changed in the interim. So I guess I'm still stuck with it.
Well, it hooked you, just like the A's situation has hooked me and so many others. So let's dive right into that. You don't have to go into all the specific details. Maybe the first off thing here, big picture view. What's your take on the A's and I guess its potential relocation right now to Las Vegas?
Yeah, obviously the A's stadium saga has been going on for more than a decade. And they were talking about Fremont and they were talking about, different places in Oakland. So it seems like, from my perspective, right, and I'm obviously viewing this from 3,000 miles away and don't have any particular, flies on the wall in John Fisher's office. But it seems like they were trying to play Las Vegas and Oakland off against each other. And at a certain point, Las Vegas had what was sort of an offer for a stadium, and Fisher decided to jump on that. And now he, after last spring, he was able to get what amounts to about $600 million in public money towards a new stadium. But it's Las Vegas, so it has to be a domed stadium and it has to be fairly compact to fit on the site. And it's probably going to cost, $1.5 billion. So he needs another 900 million billion dollars. And he does not have that money. So he's really kind of in a situation, where he's the dog who caught the car and now has to figure out what to do with it. There are deadlines coming up. There's one on the
15th.
15th of this month, right? Where he has to have a stadium plan in place or else he loses this year's revenue sharing money from Major League Baseball. They could obviously extend that if they want, but it is a deadline, and he has to do this eventually. And it's remarkable that he got this money approved from the state of Nevada in May or in June, and now it is over 6 months later, and no more progress seems to have been made. So, yeah, I mean, I think everybody watching this who kind of has a clear eye is sure he can move to Las Vegas. Sure, he may move to Las Vegas, but whether he actually is going to be able to find the money to do that, and obviously clear all the other legal hurdles and this referendum coming up,
Right.
is very much an open question. So I think it's still the potential move to Las Vegas, not the actual move.
Yeah, and the door is open. I think to your point, there's a lot of things that are a path from Oakland to Las Vegas that are in place. But you study all the deals across all the sports and all the leagues and all the teams. How does what the A's want to do for Las Vegas, how does it stack up in terms of your, let's say, critical eye?
It's kind of a lose-lose, honestly. $600 million. There are other stadiums that have cost more in public money. There are the Titans in football, right? Just got $1.2 billion.
Right.
And some other, the Rays now are talking about something that would probably be over $1 billion in Tampa Bay. The Capitals and Wizards are talking about something to be over $1 billion in Virginia, but $600 million is, still real money. And the fact that Las Vegas, just caught this up when, Fisher didn't have a whole lot of other great alternatives other than staying in Oakland, which he had kind of burned his bridges doing. That was not necessarily a great deal for Nevada. In terms of for Fisher, this is a very, very risky move, right? I mean, even if being in Oakland, you're sort of the second, in second place to the Giants in terms of drawing fans, and they have a nicer stadium and not necessarily better location, but a location that's more accessible to more people on the other side of the bay with more money. But still, you're in one of the largest media markets in the country, and one of the largest markets in terms of selling tickets in the country. And Las Vegas is, a fairly small city in the middle of the desert, and is not it's been expanding recently, but the forecasts for the climate are not great in terms of Nevada being habitable
in the summertime. Yeah.
In the summertime, right? For a sport that has to be played in the summertime, people have to, actually at least leave their cars to walk across the parking lot. It's a challenge. And, a lot of people are sort of like, is he really serious about this? And I think he is, but I'm not necessarily sure it's for good reasons. I have worked for billionaire fail sons before, and I think there's definitely an allure to someone who has some money but has not quite made his own name with it, to be like, wow, Las Vegas is really rolling out the welcome mat. I can be, the hero there, whereas here in Oakland, I'm considered the villain. And I think he's very committed to that. I don't know if he's another $1 billion in his own money committed to that, or if he even has $1 billion, but it's definitely, seems to be something that he wants to do.
Do the numbers, do the projections, does the site itself being 9 acres, does the plan of having no temporary interim home for 3 years right now, does any of that add into, I know you look at it from the financial side and how this thing will make money. Does any of that factor into your thinking?
I mean, yeah, it's absolutely. Those are all risks for Fisher. I think getting through 3 years in a temporary stadium is not great, but other teams have done it, and I think he could manage that, if he can, get past that. But yeah, I mean, again, I'm a huge baseball fan, and one of the first things I look at is, what is this stadium actually going to look like? Mm-hmm. And 9 acres is nothing, right. 9 acres is great if you want to build Wrigley Field. Okay, right, which is basically a stadium with nothing in it other than a ball field and some seats, because that's built in 1914. But modern stadiums are 12, 15 acres at least. And if you want all the stuff that you're going to try and make money off of, all the different concessions areas and luxury suites and, lounges for people to sit in when they're not watching the game, you need more room than that. And if you're building a retractable roof, those things take up a ton of room, right? Because you have the supports, you have to have room for the roof to retract into. It doesn't seem feasible in 9 acres. And they're like, no, we'll work it out somehow. The roof will retract over the buildings next door, that aren't our property. But again, we haven't seen renderings, right? I mean, the only report was there were going to be renderings at the start of December, and then they said, well, we're not doing it out of respect for some Nevada state troopers who died. It's been a month. I think we've shown respect, but there is still no sign of these renderings. And it's kind of crazy that, this entire move operation seems to be, we're just taking it for granted that it exists.
Well, and that was my next question, actually, about the renderings. Some people would say, why does this matter so much? I think the indication is where the project is at in terms of planning and details and design and cost and logistics. But I mean, they were quickly retracted and obviously, to your point, tied to the tragedy of 2 state troopers who lost their lives. Now we're hearing from Howard Stutz of the Nevada Independent that maybe it might even be 2 more months until those are actually officially released. What do you think overall, no matter what the timing of this is, what do you think is actually going on with those renderings, and what does it suggest?
Yeah, I mean, and then we've had reports that they do have renderings of some kind they're showing to like potential partners like casino owners, right? So there's something out there.
They exist. Yes.
They exist. They just don't want to show them to anyone. They don't want to let anyone on Twitter see them, right? That, if I had to guess, right, I have no inside information, but if I had to guess, the tea leaves seem to say that probably they have something that they have designed which is in some sort of state of being semi-real, but they want to wait until they have all their ducks in a row before letting Twitter at it, right? Because the last time they released renderings, everyone piled on them because they were, ridiculous. And they said, well, no, those aren't serious. So I think they want to at least be able to say, we have our $1 billion in funding. It's going forward. We're definitely, and here's what it's going to look like. And then if people say, well, they start criticizing, there's no possible way you can build that in the space available. They can say, well, yeah, we're still working out all the details or something like that. But at least they've got momentum going. So, but again, that's just a guess, right? It could be that there's still, massive fighting behind the scenes about what this is actually going to look like. It's possible they're still looking at other alternate sites because that seems always to be a possibility. So I really don't know, but it's definitely at least a small red flag, right? When almost 7 months after you got your money approved from the state and released your initial renderings, you're still saying, well, we're not quite sure what it's going to look like or how it's going to fit on the site, but trust us.
In most of the deals I think that you cover and document, no matter what sport it is or what size the stadium, it's usually like a 50-something acre site that's already empty, it's leveled, it's a clean slate. I think the complication of this one, and maybe it deals with the renderings, is that you have to think about what do the other 26 acres look like. And for Bally's and GLPI, who own and run the Tropicana, and they are going to rebuild something else, you're having to not only do your stadium renderings, but you're also, I think, realistically having to put out something that is accurate to what they're going to do.
Right. Bally's has its own plans, right? And they're not intent on giving Fisher a whole lot more space for his stadium. I mean, it's possible to do it, right? I mean, look at the Giants Stadium. I don't remember exactly what the acreage is there, but it's pretty small.
Only a few more, I think 14, something like that. Yeah.
So it is somewhat doable if you're creative. Again, they don't have a roof. That's a huge issue.
Right.
So I'm not saying that it can't be done. But yeah, you would think that they would have something, to show us by now. And I think it's just a reflection of how rushed the entire process has been, right? It kind of seems like, the A's were still sort of playing the two cities off against each other when Dave Cavell said, our priority is Las Vegas. And then the mayor of Oakland said, okay, don't let the door hit you on the way out. Right. And suddenly it's like, okay, I guess we're doing this. And it seems like they've kind of been playing catch up ever since, which again, it's possible they can get there. But, from the outside looking in, you don't have $1 billion in private money lined up. You don't have actual renderings that show how this is going to work. You don't have enough land seemingly to make it work. You kind of got to prove to us that this is actually a possibility before we're going to take it seriously.
And to close off the renderings part of the panic meter, it's probably not a 10, it's probably not a 1, but there's some significance to this missing element right now, correct?
Yeah, and we've seen this before. I remember when the Miami soccer franchise, right, Inter Miami, was talking about building a new stadium in there, and they produced a rendering where part of the rendering overlapped into the street. They just like pasted a picture of a stadium onto the street. It was like on top of parked cars. And everyone was like, that doesn't really work. It's like, no, don't worry.
Yeah.
We'll make it work. And they made it work by picking an entirely different site in a public park.
Sounds like some bad AI. I've been making AI renderings of pretty much anything I want. And it's kind of the weird thing is people look at renderings these days and say, well, it's so easy. Anybody can do it. Why can't something accurate here be produced by a professional? Why is it that hard? Anyway, I'll move on because you also mentioned the money part, the stadium cost part. $1.5 billion is this initial figure. And the way it was lined up in the legislative session is that 1.1 or so come from the A's, the rest, 380, or, to your point, other benefits are in there too. But it's a $1.5 billion stadium to start. Isn't it also fair to say that any project, whether this was ever going to be in Oakland or Las Vegas, it's probably by the end going to end up at $2 billion, somewhere near there. But the thing is, with this situation, that extra money might implement some additional factors here.
Yeah, I mean, that may be one of the things that's holding things up, right? Is that Fisher doesn't just need $1.1 billion, but he needs probably a cushion in case costs rise, which they do. He may have financiers, right, who are saying, well, we'll give you 1.1 billion, but are you sure that will be enough? And then you get to the question of what happens if there are overruns and Fisher doesn't want to pay for them. Does he come back to the state? Does he go to, the city or the county? We saw this years ago in Seattle. I remember when the Mariners were trying to get more money. They had gotten, just money for their stadium in the late 90s. And there was it was like 100 million in cost overruns or something like that. And they came back to the state and said, we want that. We need some extra money now. And the state said, well, you promised to pay for cost overruns. And the owners of the Mariners said, oh, these aren't cost overruns. These are unanticipated capital expenditures.
Come on.
So that's going to be really interesting to see what happens. Yeah, if they do get the money together and it turns out to be not enough.
That's a fancy way of dressing it up. Let's move actually on, but maybe back to Howard Terminal. And I realize even discussing this is awkward because the project as we know it entirely halted at this point. But at last check, Oakland had rounded up about $500 to $600 million through federal and state grants for infrastructure, not for the ballpark, but for everything around the site that needed improvements. The ballpark was set to be privately financed. There were supposed to be a bunch of tax benefits to the city, to the county. We're discussing, obviously, again, something that is currently dormant. But as you look back on that and knowing your take on public subsidies, was that going to be a different deal? Was that going to be actually a good deal from your viewpoint because of the way it was structured differently?
It was definitely different. Would it have been good for Oakland? I don't know. That's a sizable chunk of change to, put up for infrastructure, even if some of it, might benefit people who are not going to A's games. And you could argue, well, there's some benefit to having a new neighborhood developed there, and it would create new housing, and it would create,
Right.
But that's again, $600 million is a lot of money, even if it's coming from the state and the feds. So yeah, I mean, it's a little more justifiable, but it's still an awful lot to be putting up. And I think I'm slightly surprised that Fisher didn't look at it more seriously. From the sound of things, again, the way it's being talked about, there was he looked at it more favorably before COVID and the changes in the economy, and
Sure.
changes in interest rates, right?
Right.
Where suddenly building a multi-billion-dollar development doesn't look as promising as it did back when interest rates were 2%. And he may have balked at that suddenly, and it's possible it doesn't work, right? But maybe that means you wait a few more years and wait until interest rates come down. Maybe it means you go back and look at the Coliseum site again, right?
Right.
Which he owns half of. And people have been talking about for years. Look, it's wide open. You could easily build a stadium in the parking lot, then tear down the Coliseum and build whatever you want on that portion of the parcel. There's lots of options still in Oakland, I think, and it sounds like the mayor is definitely open to talking if the team comes back. The whole situation is really weird and really does drive home to me the degree to which we tend to think of billionaires as being these like savvy people who are looking at the bottom line and who are just trying to extract the best profit that they can, and they are on one level, but they're also human beings, right? And oftentimes it has more to do with ego or with I've said I'm doing this thing, I'm not going to back out of it now. You oftentimes wind up, I mean, this again could potentially be a lose, right? Where Fisher loses his shirt, Las Vegas loses, Nevada loses $600 million, and Oakland loses the team. And nobody comes out really looking very good. Very similar, honestly, to the Arizona Coyotes situation, right?
Right.
Where they moved out of Winnipeg years ago. And it was a disaster for everyone concerned. It's still now 20 years later, and the NHL still isn't backing away from no, we can make this work.
And they're playing on a college campus in a 5,000-seat arena called Mullet Arena, which I get it's from the family who paid for it, but it's still kind of funny with hockey, isn't it?
Yes.
And going back to Howard Terminal, just one thing that always kind of didn't sit well with me in reverse is it had to be a built-up thing. And I appreciate that they wanted to fill the entire 55 acres with development and fully flesh it out. I think that was ultimately the end game. But why couldn't the project start with just the ballpark and build it out? And you mentioned Oracle Park, formerly Pac Bell Park when it was built. I mean, right now, 25, 30 years later, we're finally seeing the development around it. I'm just curious, to everybody's point about Howard Terminal, why it was too ambitious, but it might have been too ambitious in a sense of everything outside the stadium.
Yeah, my sense is that it was a kind of multi-step response to the fact that people in California, Oakland particularly, but like anywhere in the Bay Area, didn't want to put money into building a stadium, right?
Correct.
So it had to be, okay, if we're going to have to pay for the stadium, how can we get money somewhere else for something else? Well, we can get infrastructure money, but having new underpasses and bus routes and things like that to get people to Howard Terminal for baseball games isn't going to make us rich. But if we can also use that to turn, what's a fairly inaccessible site into suddenly a place that's good for building a whole bunch of expensive housing, right? We can make money that way. And I think that is why you've got this thing where the stadium has always been coupled with the greater surrounding development. So once the other development falls through, suddenly it's like, well, we're not going to make this money back just by selling A's tickets, right? Certainly not if the A's look like they have the last few years. So, I think it's kind of this, Rube Goldberg scheme, right? Where it's like you've got all these different pieces that have to go together, and if one domino falls, suddenly the whole thing falls apart.
If Howard Terminal never happens, is it looked back at a bad idea and that's why it didn't come together? Or is it going to be looked at as a good idea that people never made happen?
I think both, depending on who, I think there's so much dispute over, people who think, no, that absolutely has to remain a port versus people who are like, no, we absolutely need development and this is a perfect opportunity for it.
Right.
And those are both legitimate points of view. And I think people will continue to debate it, whether or not anything gets built there. I live in Brooklyn where we have an enormous arena and development project for the Nets. And you can still get knockdown, drag out arguments today by asking two neighbors, was that a good thing or was that a bad thing?
A couple more things for you, and I really appreciate the time. This has been a great conversation. Baseball obviously wants to expand, but to do that, they need to settle down Oakland and Tampa. They've got to get them situated. In Oakland's case, might be elsewhere. Tampa, I know that plan has been pitched. I know even Orlando is out there. Actually, St. Pete and Tampa were both out there at the same time. But at this point, and with the A's where they're at in the process and kind of also following the Tampa situation, which team is actually closer to a resolution?
That's a really good question, right? Because the A's have have gotten the legislative approval, but don't have really everything else. Whereas the Rays owner has yet to get legislative approval, but seems to have an actual plan in place. From what I'm hearing from St. Petersburg, I think the Rays are probably a little bit closer. It may not happen first, but it's probably a little more solid because I think it's unlikely that St. Petersburg is going to turn down this deal. Again, it's possible they will. And it's a very small city council, and a couple of swing votes could change things either way. But I think if I had to, how about this? If I had to put money on which one is going to get approved in the next month, I would probably put it on the A's because I think the Rays is going to take a while either way.
Got it.
If I had to put money on which will get approved in the next year or two or ever, I would put it on the Rays because I think they have probably have more of their ducks in a row than Fisher does. But I mean, honestly, I think something will happen soon with both because that's sort of just the way this again, by soon, I mean the next few years.
Right.
And, I mean, again, baseball, like you said, really wants those $2 billion or $3 billion expansion fees. And they don't want to start handing out teams until the existing teams have all used those cities as threats, right? If you suddenly put a new team in Nashville, then Stu Sternberg, the owner of the Rays, can no longer say, if you don't give me a stadium, I'm going to move to Nashville. So they have to do it in that order. But again, Rob Manfred can tell the owners, okay, cool your jets. We need to settle these teams first, and then it will only make the new expansion teams more valuable. So, if you need to wait a year or two, you have to.
Which team plays a home game first in their new stadium, the A's or Rays?
Ooh. Oh man, that's really tough.
Because they're on similar trajectories. They both want to be there by 2028. But
yeah. I'm gonna go 50-50 on this. I can't.
Well, how about this? What would be the odds that both of them actually get there by 2028?
Not great. Just because
one of them might, one of them could. Yeah.
Things always happen. Right.
Good point.
And so I think that you always want to bet the over in terms of when stadiums are.
That's fair. Last thing for you here. The Royals right now are another team with two different stadium locations, two totally separate sets of renderings, but obviously,
three if you count Kansas, state of Kansas. Yeah.
Excuse me, three. But it seems like none of those different ideas are actually like three steps ahead of any of the other. So here's an opposite viewpoint. We're talking about the A's who don't put out renderings, who don't really maybe give all the details that people want. It seems like the Royals are literally writing everything down in 10 different places. Is that a successful or just different approach that will or will not work in comparison?
It's a more typical approach, right? I mean, renderings cost nothing, right? You just pay somebody to, they can pay you to do it with AI,
Microsoft
right?
Bing, yes.
So that's more normal, right? As you put up a bunch of renderings, get everybody excited about, oh, look at those people, the little cartoon people, they look so happy,
right?
So that's more normal, is to do that first and then figure out the money, and that's what's going on in Kansas City. Is the owner is trying to play off three different counties against each other and saying, okay, whoever comes up with the money first wins. And so far, nobody's actually taken him up on that offer because it's, an awful lot of money he's talking about, again, around $1 billion. But, we'll see how it goes. He only needs to get one county to bite in order to get his stadium. And I'm sure that's what he's counting on, is like, I may have a preference of where I'd like to go, but I'm going to take wherever the money is.
It's like fishing. That's why I bring 3 poles with me and just see which one bites, and then I reel that one in first. Neil, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate all the insight, and maybe we can catch up again down the road.
Definitely. Been a pleasure.